maybe 10 days ago, I was feeling a bit overwhelmed myself, and I took myself outside and lay on the deck, and I've now invented this letting go exercise. I'm now encouraging people to do this about once a day as we go through these changes, and if you do it a couple of times, it helps to decrease the tension, and then you might want to do it on a semi-regular basis like you might do with your exercise. And so lying on your tummy, preferably on something that's comfortable, might be actually directly onto the ground, and take a big deep breath. As you breathe out, say to yourself, let go. And then take another big deep breath in and do exactly the same. And you will notice the tension in your back and your body and your muscles and your legs and your bum and everywhere start to release. And keep doing that, breathing in and saying letting go, until you cannot feel your body dropping anymore. Because what I think we're doing is carrying a lot of grief and loss within our bodies. And it's important for us to not carry that, because otherwise we get close to the edge and we do things we're not particularly proud of. The other thing that I've been thinking about is the idea of considering our legacy. Who do we want to be known as, that our children or grandchildren might talk about us in the future? So I remember my grandmother, who lived through the flu epidemic. She talked about how great-grandfather was on the hospital board, and she would have to come home and wash the sheets because there were no more staff to do those basic jobs. So the members of the hospital board ended up having to do those things. And she talked to me about how important it was for them to be cheerful and helping and managing ourselves. So thinking about what are the values that you want to bring to this, and how do you want to be seen into the future? So Sarah, you're talking about Gary noticing people in the streets or supermarket and the fear of others. So one of the tools around managing the second part of the comment that you've made there is being really clear about what we can control and what we can't control. And there are a couple of models around that might be really helpful, that maybe we can gather and share after this. And so I think one of the big things that we can do around people's mental health is ensure that we are taking the best care of ourselves that we can. Going back to the basics, which is around eating well, we're getting good exercise, and we are connecting, feeling gratitude and naming that, and that we are letting ourselves know how competent we are. So one of the strategies that I think is helpful for us to remind ourselves of what we can and have is to finish these 3 sentences. I am. So I'd like you to think about 3 things, and if you've got a pen and paper, to write down I am, and what are the things that you might want to say about yourself. So I might say, I am courageous, I am loving, I have. So that might be, I have a loving family, I have a good education, I have a good community. And the next one is, I can choose to be the person I want to be in this. I can remind myself to love strangers. I can exercise every day. So thinking about how do we manage the fear of others? We have been told here in New Zealand that we should be considering that we do carry the virus and that others do carry the virus. So it is not about being fearful of others, it's about being fearful of the virus. So how can we separate people out from the disease itself and still think about how do we form relationships without that ability to be able to touch and connect people? Because when we're with strangers in the supermarket or whatever, we don't know and they don't know. And the thing that we're scared about is the virus, not about the actual people themselves. And so how do we, if we've come into walking into the supermarket or we've arrived in our car, how can we take a moment to be mindful and remind ourselves that I am able to remind myself that people carry the virus, they are not the virus. I have an ability to be able to stand back from people and take my time, and I can be patient and allow myself the time to do my supermarket shopping in a way that is safe. So we can begin to use the I am, I have, I can in many different ways there. Lisa, you're talking about how do you share these ideas with small children. Yesterday, actually, I came across a lovely story this young woman has done, is she's created a superhero story, and it helps children to realize what they can do to save other people, which is stay home and wash their hands. And she's got these lovely pictures of this little boy in a superhero outfit looking at pictures of his grandparents saying, you know, I'm a superhero, I am saving my grandparents by staying home and washing my hands. And, you know, it's that whole idea of being able to give opportunity when we feel there is none.
What are we teaching our young children, and what's the long-term impacts about this? You know, in terms of that, we're teaching about social distancing, but not about breaking relationships, and not about fear of forming relationships with other people, because that's got a huge long-term impact, hasn't it?
And being able to support children to be able to learn that that people are lovely. The virus is the thing we need to be frightened of. But what we're doing is externalizing the danger and removing it from the relationship. So, Dara, you're talking about how to manage the stuff that's got nothing to do with science and anything like that, and it's just feeding the panic. The first thing, obviously, is to recognize when that stuff comes up our way, and to respectfully be able to say to people that's not how it is, and to set limits, and obviously not to share that with other people, and to look at the fake news that's coming out and to explore that. And I know that the COVID-19 site here in New Zealand has got a fake news section, so it enables people to go and have a look at what the current kind of fake news stuff that's coming out is. The big part of that is, how do you have those difficult conversations? Because again, we want to be able to marry maintaining a good relationship with being able to be assertive about what's going on. So a big part about it is ensuring that we practice how to have those conversations in a way that's respectful and nice.
Some of the other things that go on in grief is the decision-making process. You know, and this links into the fake media stuff as well, doesn't it? Because you're making really poor decisions because you're not able to think, and you're jumping on all sorts of different things and looking for information here, there, and everywhere, but you've got no thinking stuff. And the other thing that people can do is make really bad decisions. What do we do about that sort of stuff?
So I think the big part about that is giving ourselves time to think and allowing ourselves the opportunity to calm ourselves down so that we can manage. I've come across this lovely thing called Zen things. Do one thing at a time. Do it slowly and deliberately. Do it completely. Do less. Put space between things. Develop rituals. Designate time for certain things. Devote time to sitting. Smile and serve others. Make cleaning and cooking become meditation. Think about what is necessary. Live simply. So I have that stuck beside my computer. When we are grieving, we resort to being an exaggerated form of our formal self. So if you're someone who is a shouter and a screamer, you're probably going to do more of that. If you're someone who hits the booze, you're probably going to do that. If you're someone who wants to run, you want to do that more. So all of the things that help us to manage stress are the things that we're more likely to do, or we need to do more of. But of course, depending on the nature of the situation that we're in, sometimes we're not able to do exactly the thing because our autonomy, those decisions to keep us safe, have stopped us being able to do that. So therefore, we have to think about how else do we manage those things for ourselves. I think it's really important for us to create structure, to give ourselves a sense of how the day is going to pan out and what that looks like. And it's especially important for our kids, because that's why they love school so much, because it has a structure to it, and they feel really safe within that structure. And so how is it that we're able to manage that structure for ourselves? And what does that look like? And when we start to feel overwhelmed again, thinking about what is it that I have done that has let go of some of that structure, because if we do keep doing that, the structure thing, I mean, we're more likely to be able to manage ourselves and to be able to think well. The other thing, of course, is this social connection, which is what you were talking about, Sarah, that we need to be able to have social connection with other people, and thinking about how can we do that remotely in ways that we haven't done before. And thinking about the people that lift your heart, that make you laugh, that you can enjoy, and spend time with them to look after yourself. We don't need to be spending time with people who bring us down and make us feel stink. This is not a time for that. And it may well be that you have some friends or family members who are in that space. So then we go back to the idea of structure. Let's have a conversation about how we want to be, about what's the legacy for our bubble, about how we manage ourselves. Now, I don't know, you may be in a bubble with someone who is completely autonomous and who doesn't want to engage in any of that. And so that makes it really hard, but you can always make that decision for yourself. One of the tools that I find is quite helpful for this is writing down 3 values that you hold dear in your heart. So would you like to write those down now for yourself? Now imagine that you have a compass in your tummy. And think about a recent situation where you weren't quite sure what to do. So I want you to imagine that your compass has a yes and a no to it. When you think about the values that you hold and the situation that occurred, did you go yes with your values, or did you transgress them? Now, what happens when we transgress them is that we feel stink about ourselves, and we undermine our mental health, and we undermine our sense of our integrity. However, if we go with our values and go no, we often create a difficult conversation. And that makes it hard, which is often why we transgress our own boundaries and our values. So you're making a choice all the time. So if you're working with your children, or you're working with your flatmates, or your family, even a work person, the more that we can go with our values, the more we're building our brand, and the more that we create structure around how we expect other people to work with us. So it can become hard at the beginning, but actually as we move through this, that other people learn how to be with us, and we're teaching them how to be with us all the time. And we can do that kindly, but it means that often that we do have that tricky conversation.
It's really interesting as you're talking, Madeleine, because, and Lisa's talking about young children and so on. My dad died when I was 6, and children usually didn't go to funerals, and many children would just assume that they would snap out of it and that they would forget and so on. But it is deep trauma, and one of the things I'm so grateful for is the opportunity that we had to talk about Dad and with Mum, and she would have those hard conversations as you were doing that activity right at the beginning, you know, and where you're holding and you're concentrating on that article. That was what she enabled through those conversations, was the conversations around remembering that person and being able to take the good things with us.
Yes.
So that it enables you to move on through that and to take those feelings with you, but not to stay in that place. Doing incredible years, one of the things that, going to the forum earlier this year, they were talking about trauma-informed practices. and talking about trauma and the importance of it. It happened in a relationship situation and it needs to be healed through relationships. And this comes back to this talking and being and helping people to understand emotions and walking with people through it, doesn't it? And so I'm really grateful for.
When we have a grief, whatever it is, it often triggers previous griefs.
Absolutely.
And so we're carrying around this backpack of stuff that, unless we find a place to put it, comes with us forever. And I think about our psychological experiences as being like the scars of the physical experiences that we have. So if you think about the scars on your body, there's a story that you can tell with each one of them about the accident or about the operation or what happened. And our emotional scars are exactly the same. But of course, they're not available for us to have a look at. But they're part of our personality, and that it creates who we are and that amazing sense of who we are.
I think it's about feeling comfortable carrying that backpack, opposed to wanting to hide it and wanting to leave it in the corner. Whereas if we can carry it with us and keep adding those experiences to it, the good ones and the not so good ones, then we've got that available to us whenever we need it. And that fits with that authenticity and integrity that you were talking about before as well, and part of our brand.
And it may also be that we have to unpack our backpack from time to time and recognise that actually there are things in it that aren't useful anymore, and that actually it's time to let some of those things go. So then we go back to that exercise that we talked about earlier, about lying on our tummy and allowing ourselves to let go, because we don't need to carry the pain of the grief. We can carry the memory of the experience.
Then the backpack becomes nice and light.
It can. Got a couple of ideas in relation to that. So there's a really wonderful resource by a woman called Jean Ellerslie Clark. Her book is called Growing Up Again, and it's a workbook to help you think through who you want to be now. The second thing is that there's a lovely book called My Star Daddy, and it's written for children whose dads are not perfect, which in fact could be for all of us. The third thing that I'd like to say is that our thinking is a whole lot of habits, which you probably know. What I've learnt from this COVID-19 situation is that we can change our habits in an instant. We've had to, right?
Right.
So that gives me hope. But when we have old habits that are very, very, very old, it takes a lot more work. But I want you to have a think about what's the decision that you have decided about what grief you want to carry with you now. You can leave it today. You can leave it here in this room. And you can never, never think about it ever again. You don't have to. The question is, do you want to carry that grief anymore, or do you want to ditch it completely and actually just go with the lovely memories and to be the person you want to be? Therefore, thinking about how do we grow that neural pathway about being the person she wants to be from today, which means actually having a new habit about not thinking about that stuff.
So now you get to focus on the future.
Yeah, well, it's hard to do both at the same time. So
yeah. So one of the things that I think is that the minute that we start thinking about something we don't want to think about, we can choose to think about something else like carrots or your underpants or what you're having for lunch. You know, it actually doesn't matter, because what you're doing is trying to break that neural pathway. But I'd love you to read a book called The Power of Habit. And then there's another one called Time to Think by a woman called Nancy Klein. You were talking about the importance of breathing, Dara. There's an exercise that I do where you go and you count the number of times you breathe in a minute.
This is it.
Yeah. And then you try and halve the number, right?
Yeah. I think Mum taught me breathe as much as you can in a minute, and then slow it like right down and see how little you can, like how drawn out you can make it.
Yes.
And that helps me so much.
Yes. The idea is that if we can get down to breathing about 2 or 3 breaths in a minute, then actually our whole system changes. And if we were to do that exercise 3 times a day, our tension would really be a lot less. And it's 3 minutes a day. And yet, you know, in this past world that we've had, we've always been so busy